Flavio's Pokemon, or if it's going to be the Heatran that again wins the day here. But we know the Baxcalibur is going to be coming to this match. It's paired up with Incineroar for Flavio, Rillaboom, and that choice Scarf Shifu for Antonio.
Yeah, the Incineroar getting the Intimidate onto two physical attackers here on Antonio's side of the field. Really useful, more for the Incineroar here, maybe not more for the Urshifu that has access to that Surging Strikes. It's going to put a lot of pressure on to that Incineroar, so making Flavio have to react here, maybe try and go for a Fake Out, but if you go for that Fake Out, you're risking getting faked out yourself from the Rillaboom, and it all comes down to the speed tiers in this situation. So whether or not you may see a switch out to something like that Ogerpon in the back to come in, soak up the Surging Strikes, especially with that Water Absorb ability.
Well, you know that Flare Blitz is the only option that Incineroar has to go for offensively, but Antonio not wanting to stop it acting this turn, just going for a Fake Out into the Baxcalibur, almost the gentleman's rule of Fake Out. You just never Fake Out the Fake Outer, go into the other slot. Make sure that Baxcalibur isn't able to set up, but also that Urshifu doesn't get locked into any particular move, so Antonio here can reassess his board state. Yeah,
and I really like the position of the Urshifu here because it really does pressure down the Baxcalibur with that Pod Ice typing. It is weak to the close combats as well, so there is pressure there, and there is pressure on the Surging Strike side from the Incineroar. So maybe forcing the hand of Flavio here to go for that Poison Terastallization, so the Baxcalibur's in a little bit of better position to maybe take a close combat, take any grass type attacks that would maybe come out, doubling up into that slot, get a Swords Dance up and set it up for the following turn.
Well, it's going to be a Terra coming out from the Urshifu. It's going to be that Terra Water boosting up the damage of that Surging Strikes here in the finals of the Liverpool Regional Championships, but no Terra on Flavio's side of the field. That Baxcalibur is going to be still a Dragon type, resisting these Surging Strikes and taking it like an absolute champ. Less than 50% damage even with that Terra committed. And it could be, yes, the Swords Dance coming up from the Baxcalibur. It's going to be able to put a lot of pressure on with the Ice Shard.
Yeah, a really nice opportunity here for Flavio, taking advantage of that Surging Strikes, not terastallizing, because if you saw the Poison Terra type there, we'll be doing a lot more damage, but because of that Pod Dragon typing, it is taking, it's not effective. It's taking less damage from the Surging Strikes, meaning it is in a position where it can get that Swords Dance off, become a lot more threatening now, and forcing the Rillaboom to go for that U-turn, coming off the field, allowing Antonio to reposition here and assess what he wants to do going forward to contain that Baxcalibur.
But this Antonio's bringing the Incineroar in and kind of pinning that Baxcalibur now. The Fake Out would probably put it in a position where it was going to be knocked out by yet another Surging Strikes this turn, but it can't protect because of the Unseen Fist ability. So a lot of variables going on, and Antonio getting his board state really set up here. Parting shot, though, goes out into the Incineroar, and it's the Ogerpon coming in. Now that Urshifu is locked into Surging Strikes, that Ogerpon with the Water Absorb is going to be doing a lot of work.
Yeah, but it doesn't really affect the Baxcalibur's position right here, because you've still got that active Fake Out, which is going to go into the Baxcalibur, and then the Surging Strikes following up on that. You could go for the Fake Out into the Ogerpon here, and then prevent it going for that Follow Me, because if it does get the Follow Me off, it is going to be able to pull in that Surging Strikes, and with the Water Absorb ability, going to really take advantage of that, getting healed rather than taking any damage.
Incineroar just instead going to leave the field, not going for the Fake Out. Sometimes the threat of Fake Out is more impactful than the Fake Out itself, and bringing yet another Fake Outer onto the field. It's that Rillaboom coming back in. Follow Me coming out from the Ogerpon. Flavio not taking any chances in this start of this game, and a Glaive Rush launching its way into the Urshifu. Whether or not it was the Urshifu or whatever Pokemon was in the back, because of that Clear Amulet, it was going to be still at 2 stages of increased attack, and regardless would have done significant damage.
Yeah, and unfortunate for Antonio. He loses his Urshifu there, not getting any mileage out of that Surging Strikes, just going in, healing up the Ogerpon there with that Water Absorb ability, and losing the Terastallization as well at the same time. But bringing the Ogerpon onto the field now, going to be maybe in a position where it can take advantage of this grassy terrain a little bit better now in front of this Ogerpon, where it isn't as comfortable as it was the previous turn, especially with that Rillaboom now throwing down with with an active fake out can stop that Baxcalibur from attacking, at least for this next turn.
But like usual, Incineroar is still in the back there for Flavio. So just to protect from this Baxcalibur could make it go into the next turn without having to worry about that fake out potential really scuppering any plans. I think that's exactly what Flavio is going to be doing in this situation. Also getting the Intimidate down onto these two special physical attackers.
Yeah, which is really important here because there is an opening maybe for a fake out and then a Swords Dance here from the Ogerpon and Antonio's side of the field, which would put it in a really dangerous position because obviously with that Baxcalibur going for the Glaive Rush, it is more susceptible this next turn, so it has to be careful not to take too much damage or any damage at all from anything on Antonio's side, and that is exactly why we're seeing that protect.
I love that switch out from the Incineroar, or from the Rillaboom into the Incineroar and getting the Swords Dance. You don't need fake out if the Pokemon that's causing the most threat is going to be protecting anyway, and the Ogerpon, like you mentioned, Lee, is taking full advantage of that to get the Swords Dance.
Yeah, and the Intimidate drop there from the Incineroar on Flavio's side of the field, nice, mitigating slightly that Swords Dance, but it's still +1 attack stat, so it is going to be very threatening going forward. The Incineroar is a great switch, though. It is in a nice position where it can fake out as well, maybe disrupt the board a little bit and give the Baxcalibur a little bit of room to maneuver, but in front of what you would say an Incineroar and an Ogerpon has not really got the ideal position here. Glaive Rush is going to do huge damage if it goes into one of these targets, but is it going to be able to get an attack off this turn?
Well, it's been recovering health all the way through, but a fake out comes through, and again we are fake outing into the opposite slot. So these Incineroar staring each other down, saying, no, I don't want anything else to happen this turn. And we're gonna have a little bit of grassy terrain recovery, but both of these Pokemon have taken a little bit more recovery than a little bit more damage than the recovery affords.
Yes, of course, and there is the opportunity here for both players to play a Protect and Parting Shot turn onto the Baxcalibur here. If you are Antonio, you could go for the Parting Shot into the Baxcalibur, reduce that attack stat down a little bit further, maybe get an opportunity there to get something in like the Rillaboom next turn next to it, and then have that fake out support to further support the Ogerpon here. But we're not going to see any of that. The Ivy Cudgel into that Baxcalibur.
And it's enough to pick up the KO. That Baxcalibur is going back to Flavio. Not even an Ice Shard for its troubles into the Ogerpon. And what great training that Antonio has given his Ogerpon there. Flavio's Incineroar again going before the Incineroar on Antonio's side of the field, getting that Parting Shot first, but that might be better for Antonio because he gets to react to the Parting Shot that Flavio has opted for this turn. And if that's the case, then the Pokemon that Antonio brings in may be able to be in a slightly better spot.
Yeah, and I think it makes it difficult for the Ogerpon if it comes in for Flavio. And if Flavio does have the Heatran in the back as well, I think it was smart to terrestrialize the Urshifu because the Ogerpon in this situation is one of those Pokemon where you think it's better to be in my base form with that grass and fire typing, because not only do you have the Mold Breaker ability, which you can also flash fire on the Heatran we're seeing now, so you can hit into it with those Ivy Cudgels, but you also have the ability to take neutral damage for the Ivy Cudgel on the opposing Ogerpon, as well as kind of do some good damage back as well.
I think it's a really good point there because the Heatran really is going to be one of the keys to Flavio for this matchup, and a really big deal in general. Antonio has to find a way to do damage, and now that Urshifu has been knocked out by the Glaive Rush earlier from the Baxcalibur, it's only really the Mold Breaker Ivy Cudgel that can target down into that Heatran.
Yeah, and that's the problem. I think if you can unlock the match, if you're Flavio, get rid of the Ogerpon, then this match becomes a lot easier than left with just the Incineroar and the Rillaboom that really don't have enough firepower between them to deal with some of the threats on Flavio's side of the field. But if you are Flavio, you've really got to concentrate on dealing with that Ogerpon. It's got access to that Sword Stance. You can't give it too much room because if it starts getting those attack boosts, it is really going to start cutting through your side of the field. I think that's the big thing here. Using that Incineroar smartly, pivoting it out, trying to cycle that Intimidate as best as possible, and utilizing the fake out where possible.
one thing Antonio has in his favor in this spot is that Heatran has taken a special attack drop. So any Magma Storms that it's going to be going for in this situation to try to put some damage down on that Ogerpon as it goes for a Sword Stance is going to be reduced. There's the Magma Storm, not 100% accurate, in fact, far from it, not connecting down onto Antonio's Ogerpon, and that's a big turn.
Yeah, and that is one of the drawbacks of that move, Magma Storm. It does not have the best accuracy, missing here, quite importantly, not being able to trap it on the field and not have that residual damage every turn stacking up, making it easier to deal with the Ogerpon. Now it has got that Sword Stance under his belt. It's going to be able to use that Ivy Cudgel into the Heatran this turn. Has to be careful because if it takes it, it is going to do a lot of damage.
The question is how much damage is this Ogerpon going to take in reply? Because as you've said, Lee, as soon as the Ogerpon is lost on Antonio's side of the field, it's going to really struggle to be able to do that damage. Here comes the Ivy Cudgel. It's enough for the one-hit knockout. Heatran is off the field, and Antonio takes a key knockout.
That is a huge knockout here, and a bit step further into taking this first game for Antonio. I think the thing is with the Heatran as well was it was such a key component for Flavio to be able to deal with some of the threats on Antonio's side of the field, but he is cycling this Incineroar and Rillaboom so well in this game. You can see the cycling from Flavio here going for another parting shot, but the Incineroar not the Pokemon that really minds the parting shot that drops, because it's more than likely going to just pivot out again the next turn and let the Rillaboom come back onto the field, support that Ogerpon even further, especially with the Ogerpon that is now coming onto the field. Flavio down to his last two Pokemon. It
looked like Flavio was kind of trying to predict that Antonio was going to play defensively with the Ogerpon that turn, get a parting shot down onto the Incineroar, expecting it to switch to Rillaboom to try and get another fake out to attack yet again with that fake out pressure that Antonio is cycling so well. But Antonio just really seeing through that and just saying, well, look, Flavio doesn't have all of the damage resources necessary to be able to knock out this Ogerpon this turn, so I'm going to just go for on the offensive and try to get a KO onto that Heatran while I've got an opportunity.
Yeah, and it's a really good point there, Ben. I think the one thing you would think this turn as well is that the Rillaboom on Antonio's side of the field has a pretty easy and safe switch in. You do have to be careful about maybe a prediction here from Flavio. His back is against the wall. Does he predict the Rillaboom coming in on that slot? You could see a Flare Blitz into that Rillaboom as it enters the field now, and that would give Flavio a little bit more comfort going into these last few turns of this match.
Well, it is the Rillaboom indeed coming in. Let's see if there is any damage-dealing moves coming out from Flavio this turn as the Ogerpon does commit the Terror, now getting that Embody aspect, boosting up its special defense in this scenario. But against a team of physical attackers, it's going to really struggle in this situation, especially losing its grass typing. It's not going to be able to take neutral damage from any grass type attacks on Antonio's side of the field. And I'm looking at Rillaboom, and I'm looking at that half flame Ogerpon.
Yeah, it's committing the terrestrialization to your Ogerpon is in one way a good thing, right? Because you're going to be able to launch the Ivy Cudgel into the Ogerpon on Antonio's side of the field, but at the same time, the double-edged sword there, you could become much weaker to those grass type attacks that both the Rillaboom and the Ogerpon with the Hard Flame have access to, in particular, that Grassy Glide.
And it's the helping hand from Incineroar. Flavio predicting a fake out into that slot, but instead goes into the Ogerpon. Another Sword Stance coming out from Antonio. He's taking this game, making sure that he's in the best spot that he can to be able to try and knock out this Incineroar.
Yeah, and with the Incineroar already out on the field now, not going to be able to pivot in, cycle that Intimidate, get or reduce that attack stat. The big thing here is, though, that the grassy terrain has just ended, so not going to have access to that priority Grassy Glide going into this next turn. I think if you are Antonio, you're going to have to cycle in maybe the Incineroar here, drop an all-important Intimidate onto these physical attackers on Flavio's side of the field, and then you're opening yourself up to get the Rillaboom back on the field, get that grassy terrain set up again, and activate that Grassy Glide that could be enough to pick up the Ogerpon Ogerpon on the opposite side of the field.
It does depend on how these Ogerpons are trained. Maybe you don't need the priority to be able to launch that Grassy Glide into Flavio's Ogerpon. We'll have to see as Incineroar does land that all-important Intimidate that you mentioned into these two physical attackers here. Helping Hand is going to do a lot of work to neutralize that attack drop onto the Ogerpon, but it is the Grassy Glide on Antonio's side of the field. 3 stages of increased attack, a critical hit to boot, adding insult to injury there. A 1-hit knockout into this Ogerpon. Antonio looking into a prime position to be able to take game 1 in our finals here.
Yeah, and just the Incineroar left on Flavio's side of the field as the forfeit is locked in. Antonio going 1-0 up in this final set here in the Liverpool Regional Championships.
What a way to do it as well. Antonio in control of the match from start to finish, and I think it was a real testament to show how important that sword stance is rather than the follow me on that Ogerpon, because if the Half-Flame Ogerpon on Antonio's side of the field didn't have access to boost up all of its stats, it would have had a real problem and had to rely on those critical hits way more than it did, where it could just have that fake out support, get itself set up, and then with its Mold Breaker ability, attack into whatever slot that it wanted to do so.
Yeah, I think in that game 1, it really highlighted for Antonio how important the Ogerpon is for him in this matchup, especially when you're not terrestrializing it, you're keeping a hold of that Mold Breaker ability. It gives you options against the Heatran, it gives you options against the opposing Ogerpon, and it just generally is a big problem for Flavio to deal with. Now, looking through his team, you can see some options there. I think one of the things that he could lean upon is that Flutter Mane. It has got the Choice Specs item, and it does have the move Power Gem that would be super effective into the Ogerpon, so that is a way for him to get some very strong damage off into that Pokemon in particular.
But the trouble is with that Flutter Mane is that when you lead it out onto the field, and Antonio, if he leads the same again with that Choice Scarf Urshifu, it's a really difficult proposition to be able to go for an attack when you're under so much threat from the Urshifu knocking out that Flutter Mane. And looking at that, Flutter Mane is carrying the Terra Fairy on Flavio's side as opposed to the Terra Grass on on Antonio's side. So Flavio doesn't even have a defensive option in that scenario. We'll have to see if that is what these trainers go for. I really like the idea. If you can deal with that Urshifu like Flavio did really early in game 1, then maybe it's a route to victory for him. But let's see, game 2 getting started. Is the same lead coming out from Flavio, Incineroar and the Baxcalibur, but a switch up from Antonio getting that Farigiraf onto the field.
Farigiraf onto the field, and it will activate that Armor Tail ability, giving immunity to the fake out from the Incineroar here, and also the Ice Shot that could potentially come out from that Baxcalibur. Like we already talked at the top of this match, if the Farigiraf decides to go for the Fairy Terrestrialization here, it becomes pretty immune to anything that the Baxcalibur can do, and gives it, you know, I think Antonio a really big advantage going into the rest of this match. Some things for Flavio to think about here. Does he want to commit to this Baxcalibur this early on in the game? It is threatened from the Urshifu on Antonio's side of the field by that close combat. If it doesn't terrestrialize, and of course if it does terrestrialize, it has to worry about those surging strikes.
And the Ogerpon has to worry about that close combat, but it's the Baxcalibur that's going to be landing into. It's a 1-hit knockout there. Antonio getting a critical hit onto that close combat to secure the knockout. Whether or not it needed it, only these trainers will know here, as a parting shot does go into that Farigiraf, lowering its attack and special attack. Flavio's going to get the opportunity to reposition, and I feel like he's going to need a little bit of repositioning after that explosive turn 1. And then Farigiraf is going to be able to launch out whatever attack it's going to be going for.
Yeah, and if it goes for that Hyper Voice, of course, it will activate that Throat Spray held item that it does have access to. But a great switch here from Flavio. The immunity from the Flutter Mane, not allowing that Throat Spray to activate, keeping it at -1 special attack. So just keeping it in check. The Flutter Mane, a great option to bring in against the Urshifu. We know it's locked into that close combat now. Antonio's taking a really early lead here, getting rid of the Baxcalibur. Big loss for Flavio, but the tables are still to be turned here. The Fluttermane coming in is a really nice option for Flavio. Can he turn this around?
And the question is this Incineroar going to have to go for a parting shot or a Flare Blitz or maybe even a helping hand into this Fluttermane to allow it to do some damage because of that Armor Tail from the Farigiraf? It's not going to be able to fake out that Urshifu, but it is also carrying the Terra Ghost. Thanks for pointing that out to me, Lee. That Incineroar could become immune to the close combat as well.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. The Terra type on this Incineroar is a Ghost Terra type. So if Flavio decides to go with that Terrestrialization on the Incineroar here, it renders the Urshifu completely useless, allowing the Fluttermane a little bit more room to operate, allowing the Incineroar to operate a little bit freer in front of both of these threats. And maybe Antonio picking up on that as he is retreating that Urshifu, wanting to keep it for later as the Rillaboom hits the field.
Rillaboom switching in, activating that Grassy Surge, getting the grassy terrain on the field for a little bit of a recovery later on. And it is, you called it perfectly, it's going to be that Terra Fairy onto the Fluttermane. Wow, that's an offensive option coming out from Flavio, realizing maybe that he needed that extra damage and wanted to use that helping hand to true effect. Maybe in a position to be able to knock out this Farigiraf in one, or just get some damage onto the field with that Dazzling Gleam.
Huge Dazzling Gleam supported by that helping hand, doing over 50% damage to both Pokemon on Antonio's side of the field, and the Farigiraf returning with not very effective damage in return. The Fluttermane sitting in a very, very happy position right now.
Oh, yeah, that was a crazy turn there. I really did think it was the Terra Ghost coming out from that Incineroar. Well, yeah. But instead, yeah, Flavio getting a really good amount of damage off. But it does mean that that Fluttermane is susceptible now to the fake out of this Rillaboom that's just joined the fray. And now Hyper Voice is going to be activated. Even though that Farigiraf has taken a special attack drop from the parting shot earlier, it's still going to be able to put some important damage on the field, potentially put that Fluttermane in KO range of a Grassy Glide.
Yeah, and I think the thing about locking into that Dazzling Gleam as well with the Fluttermane, it does give Antonio a bit of a better option to bring that Ogerpon onto the field. Obviously, with that part fire typing, is going to resist the fairy type attack, so has an easier time to come in, maybe carve out a little bit of room to get another Swords Dance set up and step Antonio a little bit closer to closing this game out.
And it's going to be a fake out coming into that Fluttermane, now susceptible, but a Flare Blitz going into the Ogerpon, getting a critical hit. It hangs on with just 3 hit points remaining. That's going to be easily in KO range now for another Dazzling Gleam. What a prediction there from Flavio.
Yeah, what a play there from Flavio. I love it because he's been locking himself into going for these parting shots and so comfortable with that. Antonio thinking, it's fine, I'll get my Ogerpon in, I'll take a parting shot, I'll go for a Swords Dance, it's fine. But Flavio not doing that, going all on the offensive here. And now what I was saying about that Dazzling Gleam not being that effective, it is going to be able to pick up the knockout if that is chosen this turn, making this Pokemon a lot easier to deal with. Great Flare Blitz from Flavio that last turn.
But the Fluttermane is still under threat from these 2 Grassy Glides from these big Grass-type Pokemon in the grassy terrain. If Flavio does have that Heatran in the back, it's the perfect switch in this scenario to be able to take those moves. But instead, it's the Ogerpon coming in, and it's going to be down to Antonio to commit the Terrestrialization of his own. Getting that Ogerpon nice and set up. The Embody aspect on the field with that Incineroar already there, already used its Intimidate, so this Ogerpon going to 1 stage of increased attack, and both of these Grass-type threats being able to start to launch out their Grassy Glides. 1 is not enough, but the U-turn is going to be enough to pick up the KO. That Ogerpon's going straight back to Flavio, and it's Antonio that gets to reposition his board.
It does leave the Incineroar a little bit open, though. It has got a move to go. What is it going to do this turn? Is it going to repeat with that Flare Blitz into the Ogerpon slot, or is it going to go for a safer parting shot into what was that Rillaboom, now the Urshifu?
The Urshifu taking that parting shot, taking the attack drop and the special attack drop, but with those surging strikes, always getting the critical hits. It may be too little too late here for Flavio. The Fluttermane coming back onto the field there, and the Incineroar going to be joining back with the Ogerpon being knocked out this turn on Flavio's side of the field. And of course, that Farigiraf did not come in. It's still in the back. The Armor Tail is still available. And if that's the case, this Choice Scarf Urshifu is looking in prime position to be able to take both knockouts here.
Great identification there, Ben, because I think that is the problem. You get the Incineroar onto the field, you've got that fake out, you think, yes, I've got a little bit of support for my Terrastalized Fluttermane, but unfortunately that Farigiraf is in the back. It can be switched in at any point. Antonio, it can take advantage of that and make sure that he is able to get at least one attack off. The problem is you've got that priority from the Ogerpon and you've got this Choice Scarf from the Urshifu. Big threats that the Fluttermane has to worry about.
Farigiraf coming in for Antonio, getting that Armor Tail onto the field. Flavio knowing that his only option was to hope that Antonio wasn't going to go for that. That's one Surging Strikes. That's two Surging Strikes. Fluttermane hanging on. It needs the third Surging Strike, but we know that's going to land into the Fluttermane. Take that KO, and Antonio is going to be able to put himself in prime position to be winning the Liverpool Regional Championships.
What an incredible play from Antonio, taking full advantage of that Armor Tail ability, closing out the fake out disruption there, and positioning this Urshifu so perfectly in the end game to get the final blow into this Incineroar, like you say, Ben, to close it up and become a 2024 Liverpool Regional Champion.
What a way to do it. These Surging Strikes are going to be stacking up into the Incineroar. It's going to be getting its Citrus Berry recovery, but it's going to be able to take that Surging Strikes as well. But there's also a Farigiraf on the field. Flare Blitz, though, Flavio getting it into the Farigiraf. The recoil is going to probably be enough to get the KO onto this Incineroar, and Antonio is going to be your Liverpool Regional Champion!
You can see the relief on Antonio's face. This is incredible. What a way to win the finals. Such style and showcasing such skill here to overcome such tough opposition from that top 8 to the final to become a Liverpool Regional Champion.